Have you ever found yourself doing really good? You're feeling on top of everything that needs to get done. Your house is clean and organized, and you feel like you've been doing pretty good at work. Have you ever found something even so small that just completely triggers you? And all of a sudden, your nervous system is dysregulated to where you feel very disconnected from everyone around. The biggest thing that we can struggle with when we are healing from adult symptoms of childhood PTSD is dysregulation. Sometimes dysregulation can last a few minutes or an hour. Sometimes it can last a few days. One thing that's so valuable to understand is when you're triggered or dysregulated, you really cannot access the rational thinking part of your brain. For me, that was a really big deal because in those heated moments, I felt like that was when I was supposed to have the hard conversation. Like, I'm really upset. We need to talk about this right now. Come to find out, there's a reason that in those situations, we end up talking in circles and never really coming to a successful conclusion. It can be a very ineffective way to try to problem solve. When I discovered that when you're dysregulated, you really can't access that part of your rational thinking brain, it really helped me to understand how to behave differently when I was triggered or dysregulated. Instead of trying to have that hard conversation with my spouse or my friend or my child, waiting, pausing, and taking a step back until I could get re-regulated and access my thinking brain before I speak about what is upsetting me. Unfortunately, what can happen when we experience childhood PTSD is that later as adults, we can more easily go into that fight, flight, or fawn response. Our nervous system was affected by the fact that we experienced traumatic events as children. I speak from my own experience. I went to over 15 years of talk therapy. The first few times I went to therapy, I definitely felt like this big step up. Like, yes, like there's someone here that understands what I'm going through, that can validate my experience. Like, that was really a crucial piece. But 15 years later, what I found was that every time I would go and talk to her, I would just rehash those old wounds, those old thought patterns. And when you learn about the brain and the neural pathways, those neural pathways are already gaping rivers. And the only way that we can reduce those neural pathways is by quite literally not using them as much. So my experience of going to talk therapy, and I do understand that there are some really wonderful therapists out there, and I don't want to discount any of that. I know it's so valuable, but I just want to be honest with my experience and why I'm sharing it. So I share from being someone who experienced childhood trauma that later manifested into adult symptoms of complex PTSD. For a long time, I knew I had anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, relationship issues, trust issues. I knew my family was the craziest, right? Like, oh my. So, because talk therapy kept me sort of in the past, it wasn't helping me. What did help me was yoga. That was helping me to develop that relationship with my body again and to be able to make choices for myself, take effective action by having a strong yoga practice to really put time and energy and focus toward my healing my mind and my body, both physically, mentally, emotionally, right? And all three, physically, mentally, and emotionally. One of the reasons I ended up with adult symptoms of CPTSD was I grew up with a mom with a severe mental health issue, right? So I, growing up, thought she had bipolar. But later in life, I learned that she has borderline personality disorder. It's better, I think, known as emotional dysregulation disorder, which I think that's more clear about what it is, because that is what it is. She doesn't have an ability to regulate her emotions, and that can cause certain things. She has very fear-based, trauma-based thinking because she is so afraid of other people abandoning her. she will abandon them first, right? And so she very much was unstable in her relationships. So when you have kids, obviously that can be challenging for the kids, right? I was the oldest. I had two younger brothers. I was 8 when she decided to take me and my two brothers to another state without my dad's knowledge. Nowadays, that would be called kidnapping. Back then, it was more common. Needless to say, we ended up moving a lot. We experienced multiple divorces, our parents fighting and being abusive and aggressive to the points where cops were called sometimes. I did not grow up with a household of alcohol or drug abuse, but I did grow up in a very religious household with parental figures who were fairly hypocritical. And so that was another added element of struggle. Unfortunately, because of these adverse childhood experiences, right? The more ACEs you have, the more likely you are to have PTSD symptoms. I think it's important to understand these things, but I also think that sticking yourself in a box can be kind of limiting. So, growing up with a really unstable upbringing, I naturally, as a young adult, went into abusing drugs and alcohol and going through a string of relationships that were not healthy. I struggled with alcoholism for 20 years, and I finally gave up alcohol back in 2018. 9 months later, I had a repressed memory come up. It's something that I share in my book, Rising, A Woman's Journey of Healing Through Rituals. It was very specific to my ability to speak up on my feelings and my truth. And it was something that happened at a young age that made it so that I just was completely incapable of speaking up for myself and for things that were really dear to my heart. And because I was incapable and I didn't have that skill, it led to multiple bad relationships. I ended up getting divorced, and then I had a boyfriend for 4.5 years. We had a really bad breakup. And then I spent a lot of time by myself trying to do the healing work. After getting sober and doing so much healing work and feeling on top of the world, I decided to buy a home. That was something I've been working towards. I decided to buy a house with my mom back in 2020 when things were getting wild and crazy. I thought, I'm single. What a great way to, spend the last years of raising my son with grandma in the house. Like, I had this very idealistic view of what it was going to look like. And then I moved in with her and I learned what borderline personality disorder is. Unfortunately, it is just trauma brain on crack. I have other videos that help to explain it if you're interested. The point of this video is really talking about the key of my healing transformation and why I share that with you. Because I grew up with instability and mental health issues and in a very religious, hypocritical environment, I definitely went into adulthood with, all of these symptoms of anxiety, depression, and it led into drug addiction and alcoholism. So I thought I was on top of the world, and moving in with my mom really brought me to my knees energetically, emotionally, mentally. I found myself in a situation where I suddenly realized that I had moved in with my abuser, my main abuser. I was under some delusion that it was my dad was the main abuser and that my mom and I had a good relationship. But moving in with her and recognizing that she has different masks that she wears and recognizing her severity of dysregulation, I really sought help. And so I found an organization, nonprofit organization called Family Connections of NEA BPD. And that is where I learned dialectical behavior therapy skills, or DBT skills. Back when I was abusing alcohol and drugs, I definitely would have been like within the realms of qualifying for the symptoms of BPD, or borderline personality disorder. And since sobering up, getting healthy, and learning new skills, I would definitely not have that. My symptoms are more in alignment with CPTSD, and that's why I talk on that a lot. Because my mother has borderline personality disorder, BPD, I'm very familiar with it, and so I can speak on it. What I find so important is the DBT skills were fundamental for me in transforming the way I behaved when I got triggered, the way I behaved in my interpersonal relationships, and the way I handled the distressing situations. Because it was so impactful, I took a 12-week course and it just kind of blew my mind. And when I was starting to actually practice these skills in real life, is when I was like, oh my God, this is working, especially with my mom, right? I was starting to have more positive results with her in our interactions versus having total relationship breakdown. And so, because it was so helpful, I started I started volunteering for the nonprofit Family Connections, and I co-hosted 2 courses, 2 rounds, and there were 12 weeks each round. And so I spent a total of I spent a total of 9 months really studying these skills. The first component they teach in DBT is mindfulness. And as a yoga teacher, what is such a beautiful way that we can learn mindfulness or develop more mindfulness? Well, it's through asana and pranayama, which are 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga. When I was co-hosting those courses with my dear co-host gentleman, he was more of like the technical side, and because I was a yoga teacher, he would always have me start with a breathing exercise. I really did start to think like, oh my gosh, this mindfulness piece and really connecting it with yoga, like what a beautiful integration. And Marsha Linehan is the research psychologist that created dialectical behavior therapy. And she specialized in clients who were suicidal and helping them to switch gears in their brain to not be suicidal, right? She's a research psychologist, so she did a bunch of research to support her findings, right? But what I thought was really cool is that she also became a Zen master. So she has practiced a lot of meditation and breathing. To see that she is combining Western medicine and Eastern medicine, I think it just is glorious. She is a doctor and does all the research, and I'm a yoga teacher. I teach from personal experience of dealing with daily symptoms of dysregulation and then being able to really have the life of my dreams with my husband and my son, and my stepkids, and my in-laws and my siblings. My life has really gotten to a beautiful place, and that was not the case 6 years ago. That's why I'm here to share with you. I hope that what I share you find valuable. I have lots of videos on DBT and yoga. Because they complement each other so well, I have put them together along with my personal experience into what I call the daily calm practice. CALM, each has a layer component to it. And if you're interested, I have a video on that you can check out. The number one struggle when we're dealing with trauma symptoms is dysregulation. And, that fight, flight, or fawn response can be part of that because that's our nervous system either going into hyper mode. So when I was talking to my dear sweet client, she was really dysregulated, and I was trying to help her calm her breath and minimize those excessive thoughts that were overwhelming her. One thing that stood out to me was her expectation of others and how that expectation was leading to dysregulation. I understand this because I have struggled to express my needs and just expect my person to know already. Unfortunately, people in our lives do not read minds, right? That can lead to disconnection and breakdown in relationships. When it comes to expecting things from others, right? It's this delicate balance, and it's part of the dialectic, right? So the dialectic is being able to have radical acceptance, to fully accept things as they are right now, as is. That's it. That's how it's going to be. This is it. Radically accept this is life, right? While also balancing the amount of, also Also balancing the effort, like putting forth effort toward what you do desire to have change with, right? So balancing acceptance and putting effort towards change that you want in your life, right? So with my dear client, my friend who I was helping yesterday, it stood out to me that she had this unrealistic expectation of her former partner and how that was really dysregulating to her. One thing I recommended to her, and I'm sharing with you today, is to really be mindful of those expectations and to remember that even though we struggle to express our needs, that's something we need to work on, right? So that way we can be more effective in communication, which is going to help with having more connection. This is something that I've had to learn, and it's not easy. You have to practice, and you need to have a person that's willing to listen and hold space. When I first started dating Dave, who's my husband now, I was moving hair salons and moving out of a commission salon and moving into a booth rent salon, like a smaller salon. And there was a lot of things that needed to be done, and he was doing a ton of work to help me. He did some metal work, like he extended some poles for me for some shelving. There was this moment where I said, and the thing I need for you to do next is, and I went on, right? Well, the next thing I need you to do is blah, blah, blah. And he was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, hold up, lady. He's like, now I love you and I want to help you and I'll be there for you. However, if you're just going to expect me to roll over and do whatever it is you need me to do, there's a level of disrespect in that, right? He had to point that out to me. And honestly, when he first brought it up, I was really defensive. I was like, how dare you? It's already so hard for me to ask for help. And this is literally what I said. It's already so hard for me to ask for help. How dare you get mad at me? So recognizing he's got feelings and I need to be very mindful. And of course, he may or may not want to help me. I need to consider his time and his effort and be grateful and also non-expectant and to ask. So what I needed to learn was the ability to ask for help instead of just being like, well, you're my person, you need to do it. You have to do it. You're my person. Of course, who else is going to do it? Instead of expecting, it's like, oh, hey, I would really love it if you would help me with the shelves. I need to get the shelves up, and that's something I'm not very good at with the hardware and stuff. Would you be willing to do that? And if so, when would work for you? That way you're being mindful of their time, mindful of their effort, and then maybe even offer, hey, if you do this for me, I would be willing to buy you dinner or whatever. Just being a little bit more mindful of our expectations. I can really relate to this. When I saw my dear client friend crying and dysregulating over this idea that her ex should have helped her with something. Unfortunately, it's just not correct. It is okay to expect your partner to help you and be supportive, right? That is a healthy expectation, but you can't necessarily be like, well, you have to help me. It's a matter of communicating, being like, hey, I would really love some help with this. Would you be willing to help me? Anyway, I know that this is a very complex topic. I wrote my book, but that was me in a computer. And so sharing my story out loud with you on YouTube, I hope that you appreciate what I've shared. If you have, please let me know by leaving me a comment. I know this is pretty raw, but it's just me in my guest bedroom. I have a real passion for sharing what has truly moved the needle for me when it comes to healing from dysregulation and the symptoms of CPTSD. I struggled for a very, very long time. And now I have finally kind of figured it out. Don't get me wrong, I still struggle every day, but it's not to the same level. Now I have tools and skills that I can use so that when I do get dysregulated, I approach it in such a profoundly different way. And I have so much more grace and compassion for myself. Like I used to kind of beat myself up and never allow myself to rest. I never allowed myself to just relax, right? Like I had to always be proving my worth. And so now I have been able to find some peace to where I can actually take a day to relax and I don't feel immense shame about it, right? So I know that this is complex and I know that it's difficult. I hope that my message has helped. I hope that me sharing has helped. And my biggest thing about My biggest recommendation for really healing the dysregulation in our nervous system is daily yoga practice. Even if it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or 90 minutes, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you set time aside for yourself every single day, preferably in the morning, but it could be the evening too. You decide what works for you, but being able to allot some time, sit on your mat and breathe, maybe sit in meditation, maybe have a guided meditation on YouTube. What I would recommend is that you move your body and really start to connect with your breath and your movement, reintegrating that mind, body, spirit connection, actually healing your nervous system, right? Like our vagus nerve, when it's weakened, we are more likely to emotionally dysregulate. When it is strengthened, we are more resilient to stress. So, how do we physically strengthen our vagus nerve? Well, asana, which are the physical postures, and pranayama, which are the breathing exercises, the 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga, are beautiful ways to do that. And strengthening your vagus nerve is just one of the beautiful pieces that yoga has to offer. My name is Mandi Gardner. I hope you found this useful. Please get my book, Rising, A Woman's Journey of Healing Through Rituals, and you can get a little nugget of my heart. It's a beautiful little read, and it's not to be read quickly. Definitely take your time with it. There's also pages to write notes so that you can really consider how you're going to integrate and implement the ideas that I offer for you. I pull from my personal experience and what really helped to move the needle to help me to transform my life. I guide women who practice yoga or want to practice yoga move from feeling dysregulated and disconnected in emotionally charged situations to embodying calm, clarity, and connection, enabling them to communicate effectively and trust themselves in relationships, fulfilling their deeper need for self-leadership and emotional regulation.